He had planned to be back before dark. He was not back before dark. He was not back for 3 days, as it turned out, and he would spend a considerable portion of the rest of his life being quietly grateful for that broken wagon wheel, though he would not have been able to say so at the time and would have denied it if asked, and only admitted it to himself much later, in the particular way a man admits things he has known for a long time when he finally stops finding reasons not to. He found the wagon on the Sutter Road 3 miles outside Harlan's Creek on a Wednesday afternoon in November of 1883, listing heavily to the right with its rear wheel collapsed at an angle that required no expertise to diagnose. The woman beside it was examining the damage with the focused attention of someone who had already cycled through the stages of reacting to a problem and arrived at the assessment stage. She looked up when she heard his horse. She said, "The axle pin sheared." He got down from his horse and looked at the wheel. "She was correct," he said. "I can see that," she said. "I'm Ada Marsh. I teach at the Harlan's Creek School," he said. "I know who you are." He had known who she was for 8 years. "You knew everyone in a town of 412 people," he said. "James Whitfield. Marshal," she said. "I know who you are too." The snow started an hour later, which was the thing that changed the calculation. A sheared axle pin on a clear afternoon was an inconvenience. A man could ride back to town for the part, return, make the repair, and have Mrs. Marsh back to her boarding house by supper. A sheared axle pin with a November Colorado blizzard arriving from the northwest was a different kind of problem. James looked at the sky for a moment. He looked at the wagon. He looked at Ada, who was also looking at the sky with the expression of a person revising their plans. He said, "There's an abandoned ranch house about 2 miles east. Aldrich Place, been empty 3 years. The roof held last winter." She said, "How do you know the roof held?" He said, "I checked it in March. Habit." She considered this. She said, "Lead the way." James Whitfield had been the marshal of Harlan's Creek since 1861, which was 22 years, which was almost half his life. He had been 35 when he pinned on the badge, young enough to think it was temporary and old enough to know, on some level, that temporary was rarely what it said. He had intended to hold the position for 5 years and then do something else with himself. The way men intend things at 35 when 5 years still seems like a manageable unit of time. He had not anticipated how thoroughly the work would shape itself around him, or how thoroughly he would shape himself around the work, until the man and the position were no longer easy to separate. He had made 812 arrests over 22 years, which was just under 4 per month, and had cleared 31 murder cases, and had been shot twice, once in the left shoulder in 1869, and once in the right thigh in 1874, both of which still reported to him in cold weather, and had in general been the reason that Harlan's Creek had not become the kind of place that people warned each other about, which was not a glamorous thing to have been but was a real one. The county had hired a new sheriff out of Denver, a man of 31 named Garrett, with good references, and the kind of direct confidence that comes from not yet having been wrong about anything expensive. He was coming in April. James had agreed to the transition because the county board had presented it as the sensible next step in a tone that did not particularly leave room for other steps, and because, at 57, with a shoulder that ached and a knee that had opinions about cold mornings, he understood that there was a difference between being the right man for a job and having been the right man for a long time. He had been telling himself for 6 months that he was ready for April. The statement had not become more convincing with repetition. He earned $600 a year, which had always been sufficient because he had no one to spend it on besides himself and the horse and the occasional replacement of equipment that 22 years of frontier law enforcement eventually required. He had no family in Harlan's Creek. He had a house he owned outright which he slept in and did not particularly inhabit. He had the office and the town and the 22 years, and in April he was going to have none of those things, and he had been managing this fact by not looking directly at it, the way you manage a bright light. A schoolteacher in the Colorado Territory in 1883 earned $30 a month and was expected to provide her own coal for the schoolroom stove, which Ada had presented to the school board as unreasonable and which the school board had explained was standard practice in the county and would continue to be. She had been purchasing her own coal for 8 years without further protest, because she had learned that the school board's decisions were considerably more influenced by budget than by argument. The school books she was traveling to collect were a new geography series from an Ohio publisher, 12 volumes, which she had ordered in September, and which had been sitting at the county seat 40 miles east for 3 weeks waiting for her to arrange a free Wednesday. The wheel had not consulted her schedule. The Aldrich place was cold and stale and empty in the way of buildings that have been waiting for 3 years without knowing what they are waiting for. James got the fire going in the main room's stone fireplace. The chimney was clear, which was the thing that mattered. While Ada moved through the house with a lamp assessing, she reported that the kitchen had a working hand pump, a stove that appeared functional, and enough undisturbed hardware and provisions left behind to suggest the previous occupants had left in some kind of haste. He reported that the wood supply under the lean-to was adequate. They did not need to discuss the sleeping arrangements, because the house had 2 rooms and there were 2 of them, which was a mathematics that required no particular conversation. She had a small traveling pack provisioned for 1 overnight, enough dried biscuit, salt pork, and coffee for a day's journey there and a day's journey back. This was not 3 days' worth of food by any standard, but Ada had been managing frontier boarding house meals on a $30 a month salary for 8 years and had opinions about what could be done with limited provisions and a working stove, and her opinions turned out to be well-founded. She made something for supper that was more than the sum of its parts. James had not eaten a meal prepared by another person in approximately 4 months, which was not a thing he had been conscious of until he was conscious of it. They ate across the table from each other by firelight, and the conversation covered the practical geography of their situation, and not much else. James was not a man who made unnecessary conversation, and Ada had spent 8 years in a town of 412 people, where everything said eventually circulated back to the person it was said about, and had developed a corresponding economy of speech in public. They were not in public, but the habit was the habit. They went to sleep on opposite sides of the main room, with the fire between them and the blizzard making its argument outside, and the first night arranged itself as first nights do, efficient, unremarkable, neither of them yet saying what the 3 days would eventually produce. The second morning was worse in the way that the second day of a blizzard is always worse than the first. The first day still has the quality of an event, something happening, a problem being managed. The second day has the quality of a condition, simply the weather the world has decided to be for an indeterminate period. The snow had not stopped and was not going to stop before afternoon. James went out at first light to see to the horses and assess the road, and came back with ice in his hat brim and the information that the road was not passable and was not going to be passable for some time. Ada had already reached the same conclusion by looking out the window. She did not say so, because he had gone to check and deserved the courtesy of delivering the report. He said the road was not passable. She said she had suspected as much. They managed this information with the practical equanimity of 2 people who have each, through different circumstances, developed a high tolerance for things not going as planned. She made the most of the remaining provisions with the economy of a woman who has fed herself on $30 a month in a frontier town and has strong opinions about what can be done with flour, dried beans, a working stove, and intention. James went out twice more through the morning on various practical errands. The horses, a gap in the lean-to, a loose shutter on the north side that was making a noise he found disproportionate. They worked around each other, and the small talk covered what small talk covers when it is doing its job: the weather, the road, the horses, the condition of the house, whether the chimney would hold. And then the small talk ran its course and stopped, the way small talk does when 2 people have exhausted the available neutral subjects and arrived at the particular silence that is either the end of a conversation or the beginning of a different one. Ada was the one who spoke into it. She said, without particular preamble, "What will you do after April?" He was carrying wood. He stopped. He set the wood down beside the fireplace and did not immediately answer. She said, "You don't have to answer that," he said. "I was just thinking about how to." She said, "You haven't figured it out yet." It was not a question. He said, "No." She said, "That's honest." He said, "I've been trying not to think about it." which is a strategy that has a limited useful life. She looked at him for a moment. She said, "I know that strategy." Then she went back to what she had been doing, and he went back to the wood, and the question sat between them like a third person in the room. In the early afternoon, James put on his coat and went out to check the horses again. He was gone longer than was necessary for checking horses. Ada waited a reasonable amount of time, occupied herself with rearranging what remained of the provisions into the most efficient configuration, and then went to the door and looked out. He was standing at the far edge of the property, past the fence, past the lean-to, at the edge where the snow-covered ground met the white distance, with his back to the house, his hands in his coat pockets, facing nothing in particular. She pulled on her own coat and went out. She crossed the yard and stood beside him. Not close. There was a foot of space between them, but beside him, facing the same direction, which was its own kind of statement about what she was doing there. The blizzard had dropped to a slow, wandering drift of flakes that were more atmospheric than serious. The land ran flat and white in every direction, interrupted by a dark fence line a quarter-mile out, and then nothing. The Colorado plain going on until it became sky, he said after a while. "I've been the marshal of that town since I was 35 years old." He said it the way a man states a fact he is newly uncertain about. "I don't know what I am without it." She said nothing for a moment. She let it sit. She said, "I know something about that." He looked at her. She said, "The county offered me a position in Denver last spring. Larger school, better pay, proper coal budget." He said, "You didn't go." She said, "I didn't go." He said, "Why not?" She looked at the white distance. "Because I was afraid that if I left the town I'd built around myself, I'd find out there wasn't much of me underneath it." A pause. "That's not a flattering reason," he said. "It's an honest one," she said. "Honest and flattering aren't the same category." He said, "No, but honest is worth something," she said, "sometimes." They stood there for a while longer in the cold and the drifting snow, and then they went inside. They cooked the last of what she'd brought and ate it beside the fire, and the room was quiet in the particular way of rooms that have had something said in them that cannot be unsaid. James had not spoken about April to anyone in Harlan's Creek. He had not expected to speak about it to the schoolteacher in an abandoned ranch house 2 miles off the Sutter Road. He found that the speaking had not made it better or worse. Exactly. It had made it different, which was something. The fire settled. The wind had mostly stopped. The second night arranged itself around them. The second night the fire burned lower, and neither of them moved to build it up. The dark made things easier. In the dark you could say things without watching the other person's face receive them, and both of them had apparently understood this at the same moment without discussing it, because somewhere in the late evening the conversation shifted from the practical to the other kind, the kind that doesn't have a clear destination and doesn't need one. Ada talked about Ohio first. About a white house on a street with maple trees, and a man named Thomas who had been kind and unhurried, and who had died of typhoid in the summer of 1875 when she was 36 and he was 39, which was 39 years too young, she said. He was the sort of person who made everyone around him quieter in a good way. I didn't know how much of my own quiet came from him until it was gone. A pause, she said. I sold the house and the furniture and the piano, which I played badly but he had always liked the sound of, and I took a train west because I needed to go somewhere that didn't know me as his wife. James said, "Did that work?" She said, "Partially. I found that I was better at grief when I was moving, and I stopped moving when I saw the school in Harlan's Creek." He said, "That was 1875. She said, "Yes." He said, 8 years ago." She said, "I stopped moving. I didn't stop being afraid that moving was the only thing holding me together." The fire settled lower. James looked at the coals for a while. He said, "I have a sister in Indiana." He said it carefully, the way you say something you haven't said in a long time and want to make sure you still have it right. "Eleanor. I haven't seen her in 11 years. Ada said nothing, which was what that statement needed. He said, "She has 3 children. The oldest would be 14 now. I send money at Christmas and a short letter that says I'm well and the county is growing." He paused. "It's a very short letter. Ada said. Does she write back? He said. Every time. Long letters about the children and her husband and the kitchen garden. She ends every one with an invitation to come visit. He was quiet for a moment. I've never gone, Ada said. Why not? He thought about it honestly, which required a moment, he said. Because going would have required being someone other than the marshal of Harlan's Creek for a few weeks, and I didn't know how to be that. He looked at the coals. That sounds worse out loud than it did in my head, Ada said. It sounds true, is what it sounds like, he said. Yes, she said. True things often sound worse the first time you say them out loud, then they get easier. He considered this. He said, Does it get easier? She said, I'm still working on that. Neither of them spoke for a while after that. The fire continued its slow subsidence. Outside, the Colorado night was completely still for the first time since Wednesday. The blizzard had finally made up its mind to be finished. James sat in the low amber and listened to the silence of it, and thought about a house in Indiana he had never visited, and 3 children whose names he knew from letters, and a school in a frontier town, and a woman who had come west alone at 36 and made herself necessary to a place, which was one way to do it, which was, he supposed, also what he had done, which meant they had arrived at the same answer by very different roads, which was the kind of thing he would not have thought about a week ago and was thinking about now. The third morning the snow had stopped, and the sky was the hard, scoured blue of a Colorado morning after a storm. The kind of blue that comes only after a blizzard has had its say and left. A blue that has no gray in it anywhere and that makes the white ground below it look like it is lit from underneath. James went out at first light and walked the road in both directions for a quarter mile, assessing. The surface was passable. It would be mud by afternoon, but it was solid enough now, and the pass would be clear by the time they reached it. He came back and looked at the wagon wheel with the attention of a man who has spent 22 years solving problems with what was available. The axle pin could be replaced adequately. Not well, but adequately, with a bolt from the ranch house's small supply of hardware that he had inventoried on the first day. A man who had been through 22 winters in the same county and had not been surprised by a broken wagon in any of them carried certain things in his saddlebag as a matter of course: a small tool roll, wire, 2 spare bolts of varying size. He spent an hour on the repair while Ada loaded her traveling case and the 12 geography books she had managed to keep dry and stacked in the driest corner of the main room throughout the 3 days. They carried everything to the wagon together in the cold, bright morning, and they worked around each other in the efficient way they had developed over 3 days of shared square footage. No collisions, no redundancies, no asking about what needed doing because they had learned each other's way of working well enough to know. The horses were glad to be moving. The morning was cold and brilliant and very clear, the way mornings are after 3 days of blizzard have pushed all the ordinary air away and replaced it with something sharp and direct. Ada climbed up to the wagon seat and gathered the reins. She was ready. The road to the county seat was 40 miles east and passable, and the school books were loaded and she had places to be. James was standing at the horse's head, one hand on the bridle. He said, "The road should be clear through the pass by noon." She said, "Yes." She did not click to the horse. He did not step back. A moment passed that had a shape to it. He said, "Ada." She turned and looked at him. Really looked, the way she had been looking at things for 3 days, directly and without managing her expression. He had a sentence ready. He had been composing it since sometime in the small hours of the second night, composing it the way you compose things you are not sure you are going to say. He looked at her face in the brilliant winter morning light, and he opened his mouth, and what came out was, "Safe travels." She held his gaze for a moment. She said, "Thank you, James." Neither of them moved. She sat with the reins in her hands and the horse patient in the cold, bright morning. Then she said, "My brother-in-law's family lives near Terre Haute." He looked at her. She said, "Thomas's brother. I visit every July. You said Eleanor is near Fort Wayne." He said, "She is." Ada said, "That's not so far from Terre Haute." He said, "No, it's not." She said, "If you find yourself in Indiana some summer." She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. She clicked to the horse. He stood in the road for a long time after the sound of the wheels had faded. He was thinking about Indiana in the summer, which was something he had not thought about in 11 years, and which turned out to be a surprisingly easy thing to think about. He thought about it on the road back to Harlan's Creek, and through the quiet weeks of December, and on the morning in April when he unpinned the badge and set it on the county board's table, and walked out of the office for the last time, and stood on the porch of the building he had worked in for 22 years, and discovered that the world had not ended. That evening he sat at the table in his house, his own house, which he owned, which he had barely noticed he owned because he was always at the office, and he wrote a letter to his sister Eleanor. It was the first letter he had written to her in 11 years. He told her he was coming in July. He did not mention the schoolteacher. He did not need to. He was already thinking about Terre Haute.